In honor of Juneteenth, the Black Liberation Day, I'm publishing the Alignment podcast from an interview with a dear friend of mine you may know as Speech from Arrested Development. He was gracious enough to allow me to interview him for my Black Entrepreneurial History in the U.S. class at Morehouse College when I went back to finish my degree. So this is from a while back. I hope you enjoy it, listen, and just enjoy the heart and the history of one of our legends. All right, so I'm excited to be here with none other than the amazing, powerful brother, Speech from Arrested Development. It's an honor to get to talk to him, and it's just an honor to be with you, brother. Thank you for who you are, what you do, how you've blessed so many of us, man, with your talent, with your spirit, with how you show up. So thank you for being here, brother.
Well, thank you. I want to say congratulations for this, landmark in your life, and same difference for you. Like how you show up, John, is always inspiring, always welcoming, and just good to the spirit. So I'm always grateful to spend time with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate that. So let's dive in, man. One of the beautiful things I've been learning is how economic power and political power are necessities for progress with any ethnic group. When there's a majority ethnic group that may have a history of impeding their progress, right?
So true.
So what we've seen is some political improvements without economic improvements, and then we started to see some economic improvements and see political things pulled back, and so we kind of have a history of that in this country. I understand your family was part of civil rights movement, and like you come from a background, a history or a lineage of that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Fill us in.
Yeah. So, my family, since the very beginnings, as far as I know, from America at least, were involved with striving to break down the barriers race-wise in business and in Black opportunities. So on my mother's side, all the way back as far as we know, they broke the barriers of being the first teachers, the first educators. And this was obviously during a time when segregation and overt racism was the call of the day. So this was a time when they really had to fight just to get a right that a white person, for instance, automatically had.
Right.
So that's on my mom's side. On my father's side, similar differences. My grandmother was an activist in the rural South of Tennessee to fight for voting for Black people and for education for Black children. So, and then my mother and father both took that on when they met each other and fought for rights in my hometown of Wisconsin. So came to Wisconsin, fought for rights to be able to own Black businesses in areas where the buildings were previously owned by whites, and there was racism in allowing Blacks to own those buildings. It wasn't overt racism, it was systemic racism, where they would just deny the bank loans that was needed to get the buildings, and so on and so forth. So my mother and father would circumvent that by getting funding from other Blacks who had monies to try to get their houses and then pay them back. So, circumventing the banks, which were racist at the time. This was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Okay.
Circumventing those banks to get loans from other Blacks that would help empower other Blacks. So that was one of their things. And then starting a newspaper. My mother started the largest Black newspaper in Wisconsin. It's still the largest to this day. It's called the Milwaukee Community Journal, where the reason she started that was because after the riots of '68, when Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered and assassinated, there was riots all across the country. But in Milwaukee, there was race riots that also happened, and so there was a lot of looting of the Black community. Businesses were burnt down, smashed up, destroyed. And so those businesses, once they got their stores ready to be opened again, they needed to spread the news that their stores were open for business. Well, there was no Black newspapers at the time, and the white newspaper called the Milwaukee Sentinel was not covering Black stories at the time because of racism. And so my mother then started a pamphlet called the Soul City Shopper, which would then be later called the Milwaukee Community Journal, which would enable Black businesses to advertise and get the word out that they were open for business and trying to get people through their doors again. So that was her way of activism. My father was an
And what was her full name, by the
entrepreneurial
way? I'm
activist
sorry.
as well. My mom's name is Patricia Patillo. When she was married to my dad, named Patricia O'Flynn Thomas. So my mother would become the first Black woman president of the National Newspaper Association, which is the acronym is NNPA, National Newspaper Association. So it was a Black newspaper association that was striving to unite nationwide in order to get nationwide ads, like from big companies like Coca-Cola or Sears of that time, at least, and the equivalent of Walmart, like a Kmart back in these days. Walmart wasn't out yet when she first started. But these national ads, instead of each paper regionally, locally trying to get these national ads, they would make a coalition, and she would be the first woman president of that coalition. My dad would start numerous entrepreneurial efforts in Milwaukee. And in fact, he became the largest Black, he became I think it was the best business entrepreneur award winner in 1980. And as a Black man in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, nice. That was a huge achievement. My point and the reason is because he had started numerous businesses. He started some gas stations. He started a catering business. He started a fast food restaurant, the first fast food restaurant in a Black neighborhood that had a drive-through. Back in those days, McDonald's, for instance, was in Black neighborhoods, but they did not want to have drive-throughs because they didn't trust that the people would give money in exchange for the food. They thought that they would get robbed. So my father opened up a Black fast food restaurant called Robbie's, and it did extremely well. Then McDonald's, of course, came in with the drive-through and did the same thing. So my point is, he started all of these numerous businesses, and together they were a power couple, and just really working hard to give Black people places that they could shop and get their news from, but also hire and empower other Black people because of their businesses.
That's beautiful, man. So, and what was your dad's full name, by the way?
My father's name is Robert Thomas.
Robert Thomas, thank you. Yeah. And I believe he is a staple at the Milwaukee Festival, right? With this corn.
The Summerfest.
The Summerfest, yeah.
Yeah. So my father also started a corn roasting business called Robbie's Roasted Corn, which is still alive today. My wife and I run it, and it's been going strong 40. So at Summerfest, which is the largest music festival in the world, I think something's beat it recently, but up until probably 2 or 3 years ago, Summerfest was the largest music festival in the world, and it was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At that festival, my father started selling corn back in 80, but I forget the exact year he started, but 45 years later, yeah. So
nice.
Maybe that's 76 or so. Yeah.
You keeping the legacy going. I've seen that modern corn. I think I saw brother's name. What's the brother? Real tall with the dreads that sings. Oh my goodness. You did a show with him recently. Concert. Michael Franti. My wife was in the background. She told
Michael Franti, yes. Yeah, he was there.
I think I saw him eating the corn, right?
That's right.
That was awesome, man. Yeah. Celebrity endorsements galore. So yeah,
exactly.
Man. Yeah. So with their entrepreneurial spirit, did you feel like some of that rubbed off on you, or did
Definitely.
they proactively encourage you in that direction? Because obviously you became an entrepreneur. How did that come
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Just being around my family, and it was very much soaking into me
Hmm,
the thought of, okay, if someone doesn't want to give you opportunity over here, create your own opportunities, open your own doors,
hmm.
and thereby not only do you create an opportunity for yourself, but you create an opportunity for others because you're able to hire people, so you're not just begging or waiting for someone to give you something. Instead, go out and try to make your own way. So one of the biggest blessings of me as a young kid was being around my mother and father. Both of them worked very much full-time jobs. And so often after school, I would end up going to either my father's, one of his businesses, and just hanging out there, playing with toys, but watching him do his thing, or being with my mother at her newspaper and watching her do her thing. So I got to learn a lot of fundamental concepts. Leadership is important. Ownership is important. Creating your own opportunities, self-determination. These were things that, just being around my mother and father, I was able to soak that in. And it was very, very instrumental for who I would become.
And I feel like I was listening to a previous interview and you mentioned your first business, um, but I can't remember what it is. So what was the first business experience you had, and whether that was entrepreneur or working for someone else? What was your first venture? Let's just call it.
Well, my first job ever was my dad working at the cornrows.
Okay.
So I was 8, and I used to work at the cornrows, and seeing my brother work there, my brother's friends all worked there during the summer. And then as I got older, all my friends worked there during the summer. So I got to see firsthand, just seeing how, oh, wow, my dad created this opportunity. But with that, me and my friends get to make money. And we would go buy stupid stuff with our money at the time. But we go buy the
Right.
new Converse or the new, Guess jeans or whatever we wanted to buy at the time. And my brother, him and his friends made money from my father's business, and they were able to go get the things that they liked. So it taught me that, wow, having this business in my own family not only gave me opportunity, but it gave my friends and all my peer group opportunities as well if they wanted to work. And that turned out to be a tradition. So even
Mm.
to this day, the corn roast, we hire a lot of kids from Atlanta who come up to Milwaukee with Yolanda and I, my wife and I, and we hire kids from Milwaukee. So generation after generation, a lot of times, excuse me, the corn roast ends up being a lot of children's first job opportunity. So that was my first job opportunity,
That's so cool,
was the
man.
corn roast. And one of the things that I learned personally was that you can't hide from work, because I used to run from the work, and I used to try to, sort of tuck myself somewhere in the corner where my dad couldn't see me. And he would always search for me. So even if there was someone else working or able to work, he would look for me to do it. And I thought he was picking at me at my young age. I thought that. But I realized when I got older that he was making sure I learned how to work. And what I learned from that is, stop running, because they'll find you and you'll have to work even harder.
There
So
you go.
instead, just approach the work right off the bat. Like, ask whoever the leader is of the job, just go to him or her and say, listen, what else can I do? And the more I found that I did that, the less there was for me to do, because I had done it all. And once you did it all, then it was like nothing else to do. Like, it was like you get a chance to relax a lot more and not have the anxiousness of somebody looking for you because you're running from them. You know what I mean?
Love
So
that.
there's a lot of lessons that I learned.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, and as a youth, getting to learn those lessons. My son's 13. We're hoping to teach. He infuses those, so I know it's a valuable,
Yeah,
valuable thing. The
it
sooner you can
is.
learn it, right?
That's
That's a
right. The
blessing,
sooner
man.
you learn it, just run towards the work instead of run from it. Run
Yeah,
towards it. Go ahead
makes
and get
life
it done.
easier.
Get it out the
Yep,
way. Yep.
that's
It
it,
makes
man.
life a lot easier.
So after the corn um, roasting job, what At what point did you turn? Did you have several other jobs you did before you turned into an entrepreneur? Like I know one of the great things you were able to do was DJing and
Yeah,
other things. Did that come first, and then you had your
it
first
did.
musical experience, or what?
Yeah, so my father owned a nightclub. That was one of his businesses. And I used to see the DJs rocking there, and I was thoroughly impressed and inspired by them. And so I wanted to learn to DJ. I learned how to DJ from some of his older DJs. They were probably 10 years older than me. And I got good at it. At that same time, the intersection of hip hop would start to become a thing. So in the late 70s, Rapper's Delight, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, um, things like this started coming out. And so turntables were being used differently when hip hop came into play, as opposed to what it was being used for before hip hop. So
Right.
before hip hop, they used to let the records fade out and then fade a record in. No, nothing on beat. And then hip hop came in and it was more of a seamless scratching, mixing type of style of DJing. And so I was the only guy in my whole city that knew how to do that at the time. So at the age of 13, I started DJing. Well, because I had a new skill and I knew how to DJ, um, I started doing parties at other places. So at high schools, at basements, house parties, at numerous little, not clubs, but venues that were around the city. And I would charge. I would charge people to do their wedding or to do their birthday party or to just do a house party or whatever. And as soon as I got old enough, I would also do nightclubs and stuff like that. I just couldn't be around the bar. But back in those days, at least, they would allow me at 18 to do certain nightclubs as well. So yeah, it was. I did my father's nightclub at the age 13 because it
Mhm.
was my father's nightclub.
Yeah.
But I was able to do other clubs as well a little
And
later on.
and where did the transition from DJing to how did that happen to actual artist? How did that occur?
Yeah, it was a gradual love of the art. You know, DJing, especially in the hip hop way, was very artistic. You know,
Mhm.
as opposed to just playing a record, we were scratching a record. That was then creating rhythms and making beats. And so I started making, you know, basically songs in my bedroom with my turntables, just playing a
Mhm.
song, stopping my cassette deck, looping it with pause and play, and just kept pause, play of loops before I ever had a sampler or any musical equipment. So I was learning that because of my DJ skills that I could make music, you know, and so I started doing that. And then when I got really good at it, I started a hip hop group called Attack, and it was in Milwaukee. It was me, a guy named Kevin Hyman, which he lives in Atlanta now. His name is DJ Kimmett now,
Mhm.
and then a guy named T.A. Wiz. Rest in peace. T.A. Wiz was murdered in 1992, I want to say.
Mhm.
So um, so for quite a while, for probably 2 or 3 years, I had a rap group called Attack in Milwaukee, and we did um, literally pressed records, released them. I started producing other acts in Milwaukee. So I had like a Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul. They had a collective called Native Tongues, and it was basically Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Jungle Brothers, Queen Latifah, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
I had a collective in Milwaukee called the Fresh Walking Family, and that was my group Attack and a number of other groups. And
Nice.
so I started producing those other groups as well. So
And then
all
was
of
that the
that was
group?
my version of 10. Oh, go ahead.
Was Attack the group that got the deal in Milwaukee? Your first deal, or was it a different group?
Well, I didn't get a deal, and
Oh, okay.
instead, we tried to get a deal, but we were not successful. None of the labels were looking at Milwaukee as even a possibility for hip hop at that time. Hip hop was solely East Coast and West Coast. So to circumvent it, similar to what I was sharing before, my father said, "Well, why don't you press your own records up, and I'll make a business with you." So we started my own label, me and my dad.
Nice.
It was called Camus Records, and on Camus Records, we started releasing not only my own group stuff, but these other groups that I mentioned through our independent record label.
Beautiful.
Each record would probably we would press up about 200 copies, And I think the cost for each record was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000, maybe $2,000 tops. And we would sell each record for, if I'm not mistaken, maybe $15 a record. And it was a maxi single, basically, like a 12-inch single.
Got it.
And so I would make money through that. And then, of course, I still was a DJ, so I would make money through that all throughout my high school years. Yeah.
Wow. In high school, huh?
Yeah.
You got started early. That's beautiful. Man.
Yep. Yeah,
That is
that's
beautiful.
true.
So clearly in Milwaukee, you start your own label in high school, which is amazing. Still boggles my mind. Your pops is helping out.
Yep.
And at what point did the music begin to take a turn, or was it then already like, you know what, this might be my career? Like, at what point did you start to think, man, I really want to pursue this as the full-time thing for me?
That was it. I mean, in
Okay.
high school, I knew I wanted to be a full-time musician
Nice.
since my freshman year. And because of that, I did horribly in high school, which I regret, because I ended up flunking. I ended up flunking sixth grade and having to take that again. And then by eighth grade, I just kept having to take a lot of classes over, like geometry, algebra, just taking them over and over again because I would keep flunking because I was so focused on music.
Right.
I'm not proud of that, but what I learned from that was, again, what I learned about the work ethic, which is stop running from learning these things. Because if you're meant to learn it, go ahead and learn it and get it out the way, or else you just repeat. You rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. And it's more frustrating to repeat classes than it is to just go ahead and knock it out.
Amen to that, brother.
So,
yeah. I've had a few experiences like that myself.
Yeah,
redoing
like,
those
golly.
classes. Yeah, that's not fun. So
not at all.
So once you found early that love, that focus, knew what you had a clear vision for where you wanted to go. A lot of people in high school still then in college still trying to figure it out. That's cool that you locked on early. So where did you feel like you began to start seeing, hey, this is working? Was that happening in high school already and you just kept building the momentum, but you were already seeing, hey, this is great? Or was it later that you started to see those kind of milestones?
I think the first milestone was in high school.
Okay.
With my group Attack, I did feel like it was working, but only locally. We tried to spread it out regionally because Milwaukee's in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the states, the neighboring states is Illinois and Michigan. Well, the cities that are sort of important in those states is Chicago and Detroit. So my father, with the help of him financially and wisdom-wise, we would take my group on tour to Chicago, to Detroit, to try to gain more, fans and to try to get more traction. And what we would do to try to get more traction is we would hire some of the popular rap groups at the time. So we hired, for instance, Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. Right? Now, at that time, they only had one single out. It was their first single. It was called, I think it was Girls in the World Is Nothing But Trouble, right? And back in those days, there was no album covers for singles. So I didn't know what they looked like. So we paid DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince $2,000 to perform. They came to the show, but to give you an idea of how much of a fraud it was, and I didn't know this because I didn't know what they looked like, Fresh Prince was about 400 pounds. And if anybody that knows Will Smith knows he's never been 400 pounds, ever in his whole life. And Jazzy Jeff was, just some other guy. So when the cover of the record came out, we realized that we had been duped. But nonetheless, side note, this was during the 80s, and crack was huge in Detroit. And if you've ever heard of the drug dealing group called BMF, Black Mafia Family, huge drug dealing collective, they were huge in Detroit. And they were using kids to sell drugs. So I was seeing kids at age 11 years old selling drugs with mink furs on, driving Cadillacs. These are kids because they're making money, but they would, if they got caught by the police, they would only do juvenile crime sentences as opposed to adult sentences. So there was a rhyme and reason to everything that was going on. My point is that we were trying to expose our group. We were getting ripped off, but it did expose our group. But we never really got past that regional effort, And so there was a glass ceiling, if you will, just being in the Midwest. This is pre-Kanye West, pre-Common, pre-No ID, pre-people that would come from Detroit and from Chicago.
Was that part? Sorry. Was that part of your migration? Like, was that part of the reason why you left the Midwest to come to Atlanta, or were there other reasons? Oh, I think we broke up. See if we can get the connection back. Let me know if you hear me.
I can hear you. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now. Last question I was asking was because of that in the locale of the Midwest, et cetera, was that part of the reason you left? Or were there other factors that brought you to Atlanta? Oh, I can't hear you now. Okay, now it's back. Go ahead.
Okay. The biggest factor was that there was a glass ceiling. I had gone as far as I could go in Milwaukee, and I knew I couldn't get any further. So I decided to come down south. Now, I already had a affinity towards the South because I had spent time with my grandmother in Tennessee every summer from all my childhood. So I loved the South, never spent time in Atlanta, but I came to Atlanta because so many people were saying there was a lot of opportunity for Black people in Atlanta. At that time, we had, gosh, I'm forgetting his name right now, but the mayor of our city at the time was very pro getting Black people jobs and
was it Jackson? Maynard
having
Jackson?
quotas. Maynard Jackson, thank you.
Cool.
So Maynard was very pro having literal quotas for a percentage of huge city bids had to be Black businesses, really forcing the racism in this country to be overcome through forcing them to hire a certain amount of Black entrepreneurs and businesses. And so Black people were doing well in Atlanta. Where I grew up in Milwaukee, there was no Black middle-class neighborhood, whereas in Atlanta, there was hundreds of Black middle-class neighborhoods. So I moved to Atlanta for opportunity, and that's when I started Arrested Development. I stopped my group attack because the other two members still lived in Milwaukee. I was the only one that went into Atlanta. So then I started a group called Arrested Development.
Now, just to put a date on it, what year did you move to Atlanta?
1987.
And then I know a little bit of the history. We don't have to cover all of that as far as how Arrested Development started. I know you had like 20 something people that got signed, and 10 of them became part of the group. But along that way in Atlanta, did you all cut your chops and begin to develop a following first, and then start attracting the label interest? And or like, how did, from the business side of things, how did that happen? Was it because you had already created that buzz, like back in the day? It's like, focus on creating your buzz locally and become a hot item, and then or how did y'all do it?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. So
okay,
we started doing talent shows and performing for free a lot in Atlanta. And we were winning talent shows. And from there, people started really, liking what we were about. And certain business people, there was a guy, I forget his name now, I think it's not Gene Kelly, but anyway, it was a brother named Gene something. He ended up managing Teddy Riley. he was a really big player in the Atlanta area, and he actually was sort of like Suge Knight. I mean, he was a little dangerous too.
Mm.
Um, but we didn't go with him, but he liked us. He wanted to sign us. We ended up going with Jermaine Dupri's father.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Michael Malden.
Michael Malden, yep.
And he believed in us enough to become our manager. And then, we just kept making music, kept doing shows. And, sooner or later, we had songs. We put out an EP on vinyl on our own record label without a label. And it was, we had 4 songs, none of which were on our debut album, but we had 4 songs. So me and Headliner, who was the first person to join the group other than, of course, me, and me and him put our monies together to put that record out. And, we sold probably 50 copies, and then the rest of them we gave away, because back in those days, there was no online ways to share music or anything. So
Yep.
You either sent cassette tapes or you sent something, but we would send vinyl records to various people. And a lot of people were impressed by the fact that we went that far. Like, we weren't just asking for an opportunity. We had already started creating our own opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And so people sort of looked at that entrepreneurial spirit and that go-get-it spirit, and that added some value to what we brought to the table as a group. And then Michael Malden shopped us for record companies, and we got turned down by every one of them except for Chrysalis. Chrysalis Records said they wanted to do a deal with us. And so
when
we took that deal.
Go ahead.
We took a single deal with them. It wasn't an album deal. We had a single deal of Mr. Wendell on side A, and side B was going to be a song called Natural. And then, and then unfortunately, right around that time, when we were about to release the single, my grandmother passed. The one that I used to spend all my summers with in Tennessee, she passed. My family went down to Tennessee to celebrate her life. And that same week, my brother, my only brother, he died of an asthma attack. And so the last place I saw him and my grandmother was in Tennessee. So I wrote that song, Tennessee, and I asked the label. Well, actually, I really sort of demanded the label, because I was in a deep emotional distress at the time. And I told the label I didn't want to do Mr. Wendell as the single. I wanted to do this song I wrote called Tennessee. And they heard it, loved it, gave me the budget to shoot a music video for it. We went to Georgia, up to the down south parts of Georgia, shot that video. They saw the video, loved it, decided to give us an album deal. And that's when we did the rest of the album and put it out soon after. At that time, we were signed. There was a group called Follow For Now, a rock group here in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
That was also signed to the same label, same time. But Follow For Now, unfortunately, got dropped, and we were kept. So they released Tennessee. It shot to #1 on the rap charts. Then it shot to #1 on the R&B charts. It shot to #6 on the pop charts.
Yeah, that was, I want to say, I can't remember if that was one of the first things I heard from you all or not.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah.
Okay. But I know when I heard that, I was like in awe. And I grew up in Tennessee. Tennessee was my birth state. So when
what part?
Like, I was born in Knoxville, but I grew up in Chattanooga. So I spent and then all my summers were spent in a place called Spring City, Tennessee, which is kind of like real country, farms. I would ride horses, teach kids, all that stuff. So anyway, love Tennessee,
dope.
bro. So when I heard that song, I was like, oh, heck yeah. It was an anthem, man. So loved it. It's amazing how challenges, like the things you went through, can sometimes birth those and inspire those things that become healing for others and yourself,
So true.
So such a great gem. So one quick question about the racial environment. Clearly there was political influence in Atlanta, to create opportunity. One of the things
Yeah.
that attracted you. Funny enough, Atlanta has a history of that, a
Mhm.
long history, which
That's
is
awesome.
beautiful. That's why it's been able to sustain that, unlike other places. Um,
Exactly.
but thankfully, there are other places. But when you got to Atlanta, when it came to the business side of things, and you're having a black manager, different things like that, did you see any racial components and any challenges, or did you feel like because of this environment, things just clicked and moved forward? Like, did you feel like there were any racial hurdles early on?
Yeah, very much so at every turn.
Mm,
Just being a black creative, period, is tough because you're creating black music from a black heart and a black experience and a black soul. And yet, that at least back in these days, you had to somehow appeal to a white aesthetic and a white perspective
mm,
because they were the ones that were signing the deals.
mm,
They were the ones that had the money to pay you for your art, to distribute your art, to market your art, to promote your art. So there was always that dichotomy of creating something authentic from your own black experience, and yet somehow or another making sure that it's either commercial enough or relatable enough that the people that had the control and the money were willing to invest in it. You know what I mean?
mm.
So that was one of the obstacles that, we had to strive to overcome, right? And we overcame that.
And
I'll
when
never
go
forget,
ahead.
like, oh, go ahead.
What
I'll never forget the first time going to New York once we had gotten signed. They had no marketing plan nor idea of a plan for our album, for our single. So me as a 21-year-old, they asked me to come, me and Headliner, to come to New York, Madison Avenue of the Americas in New York, one of the biggest strips for business, and go to the high rise and go to the conference room and express to them, which I had to have in my mind, how would this work in America? How do you
mm,
market this? How do
mm,
you promote this? And that's another obstacle because as a black artist and with hip hop, which was relatively new still, you just didn't have a lot of white people that were experienced enough to understand how to market it. And then a lot of blacks weren't in those positions of power to market it.
mm,
So a lot of times us as artists had to wear many, many hats. So you're the artist, but you're also the person coming up with how this could be marketed, why
mm,
this will work with the black community, how we can then turn it into something that can work with the white community. How can this cross over to, other stations? And so all of these things are on the mind of a 20-year-old rap artist. You know what I
mm.
mean? So that in and of itself was a very big obstacle. So yeah,
And cl- clearly, it worked. What
yeah,
y'all came up with, thank goodness, right? But even meteorically, it seems. So I
yeah,
remember when y'all were sweeping awards, everything y'all touched, just boom, 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 boom. It's Arrested Development was everything.
yeah.
And my understanding was people didn't even want to be up against y'all at that time because y'all
It's
just
true.
winning everything, man. So
It's true.
what do you attribute, one, I know it was great music, but what do you attribute? Because there's a lot of great artists, with great, well, let me rephrase it. There's a lot of uh, great artists who don't get that opportunity to cut through.
Yeah,
Um, given, I know the environment was very different than what you all were. Like you all came uniquely with a kind of a fresh sound and message. Um, like I guess what I'm asking is how did you convince them that this was gonna work, and what was the angle that y'all took to make it work? Because it just blew up. The music was amazing. Don't get me wrong.
no,
Was
I
that
hear
what
you.
convinced people to take whatever strategy you helped create forward, or what? How did it happen?
Yeah, there was a few things. for me as an artist that also had to think of the marketing for this, I had to look at a few successes and convince the label that these things can work. So one of them was 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul's album. Their debut album was very experimental, but they were an Upper East Coast group, you know, and so they were not from the South, but it was still very experimental and it still worked. One of the big reasons it worked was because they had a single like Me, Myself, and I as their first single, which used, you know, an old classic funkadelic record. And it helped for familiarity while the rest of their concept was quite new and unique, right? So I think they came out in maybe 89, maybe 90. And so with Arrested Development, I knew that there was a way to reach a broad audience if you have some similarities or familiarity to the music while you're bringing everything else is totally a different concept and a new concept. So songs like People Every Day, for instance, would use like the chorus of Everyday People from Sly and the Family Stone. Songs like Tennessee, which was more of a risk record because I was in such pain and in such of a search, a soul search, that I think the boom bap sort of funky drummer, James Brown sort of funky drummer, drums played a big role in that. And just the fact that I was bringing something new to the rap world, which was a melodic style of rapping. Prior to Arrested Development, to my knowledge, I never heard anybody do a melodic style of rap for their whole record, you know? So I felt like certain elements of what we were bringing to the table could relate to a lot of people. Then there was other elements that were happening in the early 90s that I thought could benefit us, which was the alternative scene. So there was a lot of alternative visuals in alternative music that was very much catching on. You know, groups like Nirvana and the grunge scene out of Seattle. And so you're seeing this alternative energy that really is catching on to a great swath of America. And I figured if we could do our videos in more of an alternative way, where it's not just your normal rap video where it's a basketball, you know, outdoor basketball hoop or the chain link fences or the big brownstones or the tall, you know, sort of torn down buildings in poverty stricken neighborhoods, and instead go with this Southern, rural, totally new, fresh way of looking at hip hop, but also with a very artistic visual aesthetic. So our first video, Tennessee, was very much that. It was very much, it was taking the visuals very seriously, almost like a photography book. So people that can see the video, if you imagine a black and white photography book, that's what me and the director, Milcho is from a foreign country. I forget, I think Turkey. But anyway, Milcho flew in. I had chosen him to shoot the video and he flew in, and we wanted to try to go for a very artistic aesthetic as opposed to just a gritty sort of watch me in the camera aesthetic, you know, like, you know, hands in the camera, you know, just styling, you know, stuff like that. So we didn't go for that type of vibe. We were going for more of an artistic thing, which would be reminiscent of the alternative music scene that was going on, and going for more heavy drum sound on Tennessee, which was reminiscent of sort of the James Brown boom bap sound that was sort of happening at the time.
Beautiful. And so the content, without question, musically, had both the familiar, you're saying, weaving in some of the familiar as well as something fresh and new, and then the aesthetics of the visuals all put together created a very enticing package without question. I didn't really have to see the videos. I just listened to the music and I was hooked. But yeah, the videos definitely helped. But so when it came to content also early on, like which was Revolution on your first album?
It wasn't. Actually,
was it? Okay. It was later.
After our album was released, Spike Lee was doing the X film on the life of Malcolm X, and he asked us to do a theme song. And
that's
so we
how
wrote
that came about. Okay.
Revolution.
Beautiful. So, Revolution. I guess I can just ask you: were there songs that had a, when it came to message? Obviously, hold up. Don't tell me the name of the song. I can't believe I can't remember the name of the doggone song. Where the where the brothers try to test you, try to
Yeah,
test me.
that's people every day.
People
Everyday
every day.
people. Yeah,
Thank you. So people every
yeah,
day. Several of them had, to me, had a conscious message to them, that you could. It wasn't just entertaining. It wasn't just braggadocious. There was a lesson in it. Like Mr. Wendell,
yeah,
like just
yeah,
it, to me, I call that conscious hip hop. Like if it's
yeah,
teaching something that empowers us, if it teaches
yeah.
something that enlightens us, right? To me,
Yeah,
that's conscious hip hop. Um,
I agree.
so was that the intent early on to weave that into your music? Because I know there's, I can think of multiple songs, but I didn't write them all down beforehand. They're just coming up for me. But
Yeah,
is that an intentional move? And it even felt like that with the
very much so.
imagery of the group. And if so, why? Why did you do that?
Yeah, it was very much intentional. And living in Milwaukee, you see the polarity of white reality and black reality. Black people in Milwaukee, generally speaking, lived in the ghetto. White people in Milwaukee, generally speaking, lived in the middle class, upper class neighborhoods. Most of the nice established businesses were white owned. Most of the sort of rundown businesses were black owned. This was the reality in Milwaukee. It's very polar opposites. And Milwaukee was rated as one of, well, actually for many years in a row, was rated as the worst city in the United States for Black people to live.
Hmm.
So being in that atmosphere and being around my mother's newspaper, which dealt with all the positives and negatives in the Black community, I was very aware of the issues. I knew that I wanted to start a group that was going to address the issues. I knew that we as a people were in a state of arrested development. So I put that as the name of the group to constantly remind myself what I'm fighting against. So, yes, it was very intentional. We want to make conscious music. We want to change the narrative of what Black music is at that time. At that time, a lot of it was NWA, Ice-T, Ice Cube, all of which brought certain valuable things to the table, but most of it ultimately turned into a lot of degrading of Black women, a lot of glorification of violence and selling drugs and pimping and things that were destroying the community. So we wanted to come out with a different narrative
Hmm.
than that. And so all of that was very intentional.
Sorry, I thought I hit mute and I couldn't find my mute button. My bad.
Uh,
So the what I love, like I've been listening, following, and the last two albums you all have put out have been, to me, um just quality message, feel, having that mass appeal, contemporary, whatever you what words you want to put on it, have been as equally as moving to me as your earliest material.
Thank you.
Now I don't know how in the US, I feel like the US, when you tune into the top 10, it's not really supporting that kind of music.
Yeah.
But the messaging in there, I mean, some of the stuff, bro, you had me tripping. Now I'm listening and hearing Deepak Chopra on the track or something.
Yeah.
But I'm like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, what? I'm
Yeah.
like, this is good stuff.
Yeah.
But just
Right.
so that's conscious hip hop in another way. But
Yeah, it is.
what I love is you kept that same type of empowering messaging, is how I would phrase it, and enlightening messaging throughout these last couple of albums as well. And so I don't even have a question there. I'm just saying thank you because I feel like
Thanks, man.
I feel like that's important for even if we're bobbing our heads, etc. And even if it's a little braggadocious in there too, right?
Right,
It's like
right,
that's gonna appeal to people, but then to be
right.
able to slide in that wonderful, empowering message to turn the lights on, right? I feel like that's what your
Yeah,
music does, man. And just yeah, I love it, bro. I can't thank you enough for continuing that legacy, continuing to make hot stuff so we can
thank you,
bob our
brother.
heads,
Thank you.
man. It's
I appreciate your support, man. You've been so vocal, so visible as a support, and it means everything to me. So I really appreciate it. And
my
yeah, I
pleasure.
mean, similar to what I was feeling in the 90s, I've had to recalibrate and reinvent in some ways the group because the landscape changed so much
Mm-hmm.
and what people were looking for changed so much. So yeah, I think the last two albums with Configure, the Don't Fight Your Demons album and the F and Love album was a re-evaluation and therefore a reinvention in a sense
Nice.
of, how do we approach the same mission but in a different way, and so you're right, it has found a lot more success, and you're right, it hasn't reached that mainstream, success that we've had in the 90s, but it has reached a lot of new listeners and a
Exactly.
great deal of passionate fans who
Yep.
really love what we're doing right now. Yeah.
That's beautiful, brother. And the reality to me as is being talked about, uh, there still seems to be, you tell me, but there still seems to be a little bit of the gatekeeper thing going on in music in the
Yeah.
US specifically, where
Yeah.
if it's not a certain thing, it doesn't get that huge push.
Yeah.
And if you're not fitting into these cookie cutter things, um, the machine doesn't necessarily get behind you, right? You got to do it all yourself, right?
That's a fact.
Okay. And so
That is a fact.
for you all having the kind of messaging you're having, and seeing from my perspective, it seems like uh, the over the last couple years in the U.S. things have built more, but it seemed like prior to that you were continuing to build outside of the U.S. Would that
That's
be
correct.
accurate?
Yeah, it would be. Thank God that, places like Europe has a lot more appreciation for tradition. So
Mm,
they like soul music still. They like R&B music, and I mean that not just like a Chris Brown or what have you, but like R&B, like Earth, Wind and Fire, or
nice.
Al Green, or you know soul music, funk
Hmm.
music. There's still funk festivals and soul festivals. There's not really that in America. So they appreciate tradition. And so what I mean by that is they appreciate groups like Arrested Development who brought them something 30 years ago. They want to hear what we're doing now. Now I just mentioned Europe, but it's Canada, it's Africa, it's Australia, New Zealand, um, Dubai. So thank God there's other countries and places that appreciate tradition, and they appreciate if something is great, they will celebrate it and they will support it. So yeah, throughout the last 30 years, after our big run in the United States in the 90s, we've been able to sustain because of countries like that.
And how has this last, well, obviously the pandemic that probably impacted everybody's business. And I know you were touring at
Definitely.
the top prior to up into that. But after the pandemic and as things begin to open up, has anything surprised you with since the pandemic and up until now in your business and what you've been doing?
Yes. Just the number of fans that are ready to get back out and support the music.
Hmm.
We've toured more this year in Europe than any other time in my entire 30 years.
Wow.
And that's partially because of the closed down state that everybody was in for the pandemic for 2 years. And the other positive thing about the pandemic is it allowed me to create Don't Fight Your Demons and For the F and Love, which both were created during the pandemic. I met Configa during the pandemic virtually at least.
Nice.
And I met him in person when I just went to London earlier this year. But prior to that, I had never met him, but we did 2 albums together. So,
Mm.
you know, like we're doing now on Zoom, passing files via online, creating songs back and forth via online using technology. We're able to create whole albums,
Mm.
and get numerous people to collaborate that we weren't in the same room with. So that was the double-edged sword of the pandemic.
Right. That makes sense. And I'm gonna wrap it up because I know time is of the essence for you. Um, One question that I haven't phrased yet, but I'm going to try to speak it out. So I know you come from a similar background. We crossed paths in the past and were part of a background that really looked at cultures as worthy of respect and love. Like, didn't necessarily say, hey, this culture better than this culture. It wasn't about superiority. It
Sure.
was about connection and love, right? So I believe you
Fact.
share that
Yeah, we do.
of view. And I know, just as some of my music targets specific topics, like I think I explain it like this: if one of your members of the family is hurting, you focus attention there, right? And you
Exactly.
put some attention to heal the wound. You
Exactly.
love all the family, but this one's hurt, so you gonna
Exactly.
focus. And sometimes that's necessary. Um, with your approach in your music, of course, you mentioned how your background informed that, the contrast that you saw. Now moving forward, where do you feel that mission is now with the music, when it comes to Black culture, when it comes to all cultures?
Yeah.
Do you have like a specific intent of what you want to do with the music going forward, or where are you at with that?
Yeah. It's still the same. When I go home to Milwaukee, it's still the same.
Hmm.
Even as I look at the American landscape, it's very similar, meaning the racial dynamic and the racial disparities. And even when I go overseas, I can go to Australia and the Aboriginal people are fighting a very similar struggle than we are as Black Americans. I can go to um, the islands or even to South Africa, for instance. And while Black Africans are the majority, white Africans are the powerful minority to this very day. Um, so you still see the remnants of colonialism, the slave trade, and what that did, the Berlin Conference, which was a conference held where different countries in Europe decided which countries in Africa they were going to take. So they had a meeting called the Berlin Conference where they decided which ones are we going to steal. Okay, we'll steal this country. We'll steal this country. The natural resources, the the dollar, the opportunities for people to thrive in those countries. So I still see it, and so the music still remains with the primary focus on people of the African diaspora. Well, one thing I've learned about being an artist is you don't pick your fan base. You can pick your topics, but you can't pick your fan base. I'm very grateful for the fan base we have. It is many whites, it is Africans, it is Aboriginals, it is people from the indigenous cultures throughout the world, and it is people of Black American descent. So I'm very grateful. We have a very international audience, and I think our fan base understands that we probably are going to approach things from a Black perspective, and they're cool with it. I think that that's what they've come to expect from an Arrested Development project.
I love that, brother. And last word, man, I want to leave it to you. If there's one thing for the readers, considering a lot of this is going to be typed up, that you would want to leave as a message to whoever's been listening to this, what would that be?
I would say that Black entrepreneurship is a multi-pronged is of multi-pronged importance. One is it gives you opportunity to create your own destiny. But two is it gives other people within the community an opportunity to create their own destinies through employment and through dignity and through, just having that opportunity. And it also helps to inspire other entrepreneurs to do the same. So I think that it is just an extremely powerful asset as a people. And I don't do a whole lot of begging for opportunity. Instead, I ask and I fight to gain access to monies and things that I can build on my own. Um, that's a very big thing for me, and I think anyone reading this can learn that entrepreneurship is very, very important to having the power to excel and to propel yourself into the future and your people into the future.
Absolutely, man. Well, you have been truly an inspiration. I know not just to me, to so many folk, but I can only talk about my my view. Um, to been an inspiration, even to get to know you. I remember when I first got to meet you and get to know you, and how humble you have remained. That in itself, I think, is speaks to your heart, speaks to your values, speaks to how you were raised, speaks to your parents. Like I've never had the sense that you felt you were better than others. You know what I'm saying? Never had the sense
Yeah,
that like some people have the superiority diva complex and
yeah,
stuff like that. Like
yeah.
you've always just been very down to earth, very caring from my perspective, and I feel like
Well,
that
thank you.
in and of itself is an example people need. You know what I'm
Amen.
saying? Like
Yeah,
they
yeah, I
need to
do.
see that kind of humility, that kind of love, that kind of approachability, and the kind of success you've been able to create, put together, so people don't fall for that lie that you got to be a jerk or you got to be
Exactly.
a diva
Yeah,
to succeed, or you got to be,
yeah,
all these other things. So in a
yeah.
lot of
That's so
ways,
true, bro.
you have been an alternative
Yeah,
for
I
many
appreciate
of us.
that.
Most definitely, man. So thank you for continuing. Thank you for just your example and for your time today, brother. I appreciate
No
this. I
doubt.
can tell you a lot of my I just got an email today, actually, from, and I'm not saying this to boast, but to tell you that I feel like I'm back in school to inspire,
That's right.
and to learn, but not
Yeah.
only long term, but now even in the
Right.
classes. Like I got an email from one of my classmates just saying, "Brother, these weeks I've been in school with you. You have changed my mind. You have helped. I can't wait.
Wow.
I can't wait to share this paper so people can be further inspired, man. Because I
That's
think
dope, man.
it's gonna be helpful. So thank you, brother. I so appreciate your time, man.
You're very welcome, man. It's my pleasure.